The story I'm about to tell you is about a young salesman who worked tirelessly to support his poor family, dragging himself through a job he despised just to keep them afloat. But one morning, everything changed. His body transformed into a grotesque, insect-like creature. The human was still there, trapped inside, but the world only saw a monster. His name was Gregor Samsa, who then cried, saying this, "What has happened to me? I can't make you or anyone else understand what it's like inside me. How could I explain why it's this way when I can't even explain it to myself?" But what changed wasn't just his body. It was the people around him. Even the ones he loved, even the ones he sacrificed everything for. This video is about that part, how even the kindest, most loving people can abandon you when you no longer serve a purpose. Through Kafka's The Metamorphosis, we'll explore the darker sides of human nature, how quickly empathy turns to disgust, how love fades into duty, and how duty can turn into resentment. This is not just a story about transformation, it's about rejection, shame, isolation, and the silent cruelty of those closest to us. And these themes, sadly, feel more real today than ever. Let's first walk through the brilliance of Kafka's novella before we dive into the deeper truths hiding beneath its strange and tragic surface. Gregor Samsa, the sole breadwinner of his financially dependent family, wakes up one morning to an impossible reality. He is transformed into a monstrous insect. His body is grotesque, a hard, segmented shell, numerous twitching legs, and an abdomen too heavy to lift. He first thought of it as a bad dream and tried to sleep it off, but soon he realized this is very real. And yet, his second thoughts were not of horror but of responsibility, about missing his train. The fear of losing his job and failing his family overwhelms his initial panic, and he desperately tries to roll out of bed and open the door, though his insect limbs fail him. Outside his locked room, his mother knocks gently, concerned about his lateness. Inside, Gregor struggles and produces only a garbled, inhuman noise. Soon after, his manager, the chief clerk, arrives at their home, questioning Gregor's sudden absence from work and his declining performance. Still believing Gregor to be inside in his normal form, he grows impatient. Finally, with unbearable effort and using his jaw to twist the lock, Gregor opens the door. The moment the clerk sees Gregor's horrific appearance, he bolts in terror. His mother collapses in a faint. His father, red-faced and panicked, drives Gregor back into the room with the sound of footsteps and a cane, treating him like an animal rather than a son. Confined to his room, Gregor is isolated from the world he once bore on his shoulders. The door is locked at all times. Only his younger sister, Greta, shows initial compassion, bringing him food, cleaning his room, even speaking softly to him. Gregor hides under the couch whenever she enters, too ashamed of his monstrous body. He begins to reject fresh food, preferring scraps, leftovers, and decayed trash. He clings to a picture of a woman in fur hanging on his wall, crawling onto it protectively when his mother and Greta attempt to remove his furniture. His mother is conflicted. She wants to believe her son still exists inside this insect shell. But after she faints from the sight of him clinging to the wall, Greta changes. She grows distant, bitter. Her tone sharpens. She locks him in and begins cleaning less, often with disgust. The turning point arrives when his father, returning home to the site of the chaos, hurls apples at Gregor. One of them buries itself in his back, festering, and is never removed. As Gregor deteriorates, the family moves on. His father, once passive and unemployed, becomes a bank clerk again. His mother starts sewing. Greta takes a job as a salesgirl. They reduce household staff to a single charwoman and rent a room to 3 strict tenants who expect silence and tidiness. Gregor's room, once his sanctuary, becomes a dusty storage space. The door is opened only in the evenings, so he can peek out and see the family dining in silence. No one speaks to him anymore. One night, drawn by the sound of Greta's violin playing, Gregor creeps into the living room, but the tenants are horrified, demanding their rent back. Greta, overwhelmed and humiliated, makes a final decision. "It's not Gregor," she cries. "It's a monster. We must get rid of it." Wounded, unloved, and no longer seen as family, Gregor returns to his room and lies down. He doesn't eat. He doesn't move. By dawn, he dies, quietly, alone, with a final thought of love for his family, even as they've abandoned him. When the charwoman finds his corpse, she informs the family, and their reaction isn't grief, but relief. They take the day off, dismiss the tenants, and board a tram to the countryside. For the first time in months, they smile. Greta stretches, radiant and blooming in youth, and her parents look at her with pride and hope for the future, and the novel just ends here. But not without raising multiple questions for those who dare to think, and I will try to answer all those questions one by one. So let's get into it. Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis is not just about a man turning into a bug. It's about what happens when society strips you down to your function, then discards you when you no longer serve that function. Before his transformation, Gregor Samsa was seen not as a son, not as a brother, but as a tool. His worth was tied entirely to what he provided. The moment he could no longer perform, he became useless in their eyes. First a burden, then a disgrace, and eventually something subhuman. Gregor's manager, the office clerk, shows up at his house the very morning he misses work, furious and suspicious. The clerk doesn't ask if Gregor is all right. He just wants production back on track. Gregor thinks to himself that if it weren't for his parents' debts, he would have quit long ago. He resents his job, his boss, and the bunch of scoundrels at work, but he endures it. That's the tragedy. Gregor isn't lazy. He's alienated. Even before turning into a vermin, he feels like one, crawling through life under the weight of expectations. Kafka here illustrates how both corporate structures and familial bonds collapse under the pressure of utility. The Samsas only loved Gregor when he was filling their bank accounts. Once he becomes that thing in the room, the love disappears. His father, now employed again and feeling powerful in his uniform, hurls apples at Gregor like a pest control agent. One apple lodges in his back and rots there, a literal and symbolic wound that festers as the family's love decays. Even Greta, who at first takes care of Gregor, bringing him food and cleaning his room, begins to change. Her initial concern seems less about brotherly love and more about the freedom she hoped his income would bring. She wanted to be a violinist, but their parents never supported that dream. Gregor did, and so she cared, until he could no longer be her supporter. Eventually, she too refers to him as it, insisting they must get rid of him. It's a moment that turns the knife. The sister who once whispered gently now demands exile. This utilitarian cruelty isn't just a narrative, it's a philosophy. Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus spoke of how identity dissolves when society refuses to see the inner person. In The Metamorphosis, society doesn't kill Gregor. Society erases him. By denying him dignity, by reducing him to a role, they turn him into a monster. Not because he changed, but because they stopped seeing him as human. That leads us to the absurdity of life and how a man trapped in it feels, which I am going to discuss now. Kafka never explains the transformation. It just happens, brutally, silently, without reason or cause. And that is the point. Like life itself, sometimes the most devastating changes arrive without logic or meaning. Gregor's existence becomes absurd overnight, and he's left grappling with questions we all ask at our lowest. Why me? What's the point? Am I just a burden? These questions drive him into isolation. His family, whom he supported faithfully, can no longer look at him without horror. They all started to leave him. Gregor begins to see his existence through the eyes of others, as a creature, not a person. He lies alone in a darkened room, listening to the muffled voices of his family, who now refer to him as it. The only time he feels alive is when he hears Greta playing the violin. And that is why Kafka wrote, "Was he a beast, if music could move him so?" He crawls toward the sound, not to frighten, but to listen, to remember something beautiful. Yet even that act of quiet longing is met with fear and rejection. At that moment, Gregor no longer questions why he's been transformed. He understands he's not wanted. His death becomes a silent rebellion, not filled with rage, but resignation. He stops eating, he lets go. And as he lays there, weak and broken, he accepts that he must go away even more strongly than his sister, and waits peacefully for the morning light. Yet even in his last moments, Gregor still feels love for the very people who abandoned him. This paradox is at the heart of existential suffering. Even when the world treats you as nothing, your internal world doesn't just vanish. Gregor still holds on to who he was, even when no one else does. In a way, this is the same rebellion Camus speaks of in the myth of Sisyphus, to find dignity in the struggle itself. Even when condemned to absurdity, even when turned into a monster, Gregor doesn't turn bitter. He chooses love over hatred. Kafka's genius lies in showing that existential dread isn't reserved for philosophers in ivory towers. It's hidden in the quiet lives of ordinary people, crushed under silent burdens. Gregor's life didn't unravel because he was weak or foolish. It unraveled because he was human, and the world didn't know what to do with that. The metamorphosis becomes a mirror for our own lives, especially in moments when we feel alien, misunderstood, or out of place. It reminds us that despair can come quietly, not with screams, but with silence. And yet even then, there can be dignity. Gregor dies not as a monster, but as a soul seeking peace. And maybe that's the most human thing of all. Seeing his suffering, a question just popped up in my head about free will, and I will now try to answer that puzzle through Kafka in the next chapter. From the moment the metamorphosis begins, it becomes clear that Gregor Samsa was never the master of his own life. Even before his transformation, he was bound by external obligations, societal roles, family duties, financial burdens that dictated every choice he made. The irony is, Gregor was already living in a prison long before he woke up as an insect. This is what makes Kafka's use of absurdity so powerful. The metamorphosis isn't the start of Gregor's lack of freedom. It's merely a grotesque exaggeration of what was already true. Everyone in his family wants him to just disappear. This transition, from breadwinner to bug, from brother to burden, exposes a deeper truth. Gregor never had agency, not really. His life was always steered by duty, fear, and external pressure. We often assume we are free because we can choose what job to take or who to love, but Kafka strips this illusion bare. Gregor didn't choose his profession. It was thrust upon him out of desperation to save his family. He didn't live for himself, he lived as a function. Even after his transformation, when all work is impossible, he still doesn't rebel. He doesn't scream. He doesn't try to escape. He simply shrinks into the corner and disappears slowly, dying without protest, almost apologetically. This haunting resignation speaks to something many people feel today, the sensation of being trapped in a life chosen for you. Many wake up exhausted, go to jobs they hate, return home to criticism, and repeat. And yet they keep going, out of guilt, out of fear, out of shame, just like Gregor. There's no time to reflect on identity or purpose because the world doesn't pause for that. The machine keeps grinding. Even when Greta says that if it were really Gregor, he would have left of his own free will to spare them the burden, we are confronted with a cruel paradox. What choice did Gregor have? He was locked in, physically and emotionally. His autonomy was not just limited, it was erased. Yet Gret believes that free will means sacrifice. In her eyes, a truly moral Gregor would have simply died. Camus argued that in an absurd universe, rebellion lies in how we respond to our suffering. Nietzsche believed in the will to power, an inner force to assert meaning even when the world tries to suppress it. But Kafka doesn't allow Gregor this philosophical rebellion. Instead, Gregor's last act of free will is tragic and quiet. He chooses to die, not with defiance, but with love. He hears Greta's words and realizes that his presence only brings pain. And so, he crawls into the dark and lets go. His death is not a dramatic martyrdom. It's a surrender. And that is what makes it so devastating. Because in the end, the metamorphosis doesn't offer a triumphant reclaiming of self. It offers a mirror. A mirror for all those who've lived their lives according to others' expectations, who've been told that duty is more important than desire, who've sacrificed freedom for survival. But why do they do that? This is what I am going to discuss now. Shame is the silent engine that drives every heartbreak in the metamorphosis. From Gregor's first moment as an insect, it becomes clear that his tragedy is not just physical, but psychological. He doesn't rage or scream, he hides. To spare her from even these glimpses, Kafka writes, he dragged the sheet and laid it in such a way as to conceal himself entirely. Even in his grotesque new form, Gregor's deepest concern is how his sister perceives him. That act of hiding is the first quiet scream of shame, and the beginning of his slow erasure. What unfolds next is a house soaked in quiet humiliation. His mother cannot bear to look at him. His father responds with violent rejection, not just because of fear, but because of what Gregor's new form represents. A break from normalcy, from dignity, from social image. The father isn't just angry that Gregor is a bug. He is ashamed that the family now lives with something unpresentable. Greta initially tries to care for him, but shame corrodes even her compassion. Eventually, she explodes. I don't want to call this monster my brother. We have to try and get rid of it. Her words strip Gregor of all remaining humanity. His sister no longer sees someone she once loved, but something that must be eliminated. Shame has turned love into loathing. His death isn't just a biological end. It is a surrender to the unbearable weight of shame, shame imposed by others, and shame taken deep into the self. And when it happens, there is no grand farewell. The charwoman simply says, "You needn't worry about how you're going to get rid of it," referring to Gregor not as a man, not even as a creature, but as garbage. What's most haunting is how shame strips everyone of their humanity. The Samsas aren't villains. They're crushed under societal expectations, economic pressures, and their own fear of judgment. They insist they've done all that's humanly possible to care for Gregor, not as an act of love, but as a plea for moral absolution. It's the kind of sentence people say to silence guilt, not heal it. This pattern isn't unique to Kafka's world. Throughout literature, from Dostoevsky's guilt-ridden Raskolnikov to Nietzsche's concept of ressentiment, shame is the great isolator. It forces people to define themselves not by love, but by rejection. Gregor's family needs him to stop being Gregor, so they don't have to feel bad about abandoning him. But Kafka's commentary extends far beyond fiction. In today's world, shame remains a powerful force. It keeps people in jobs they despise, masks their desires, and silences their struggles. We censor ourselves constantly, not out of moral conviction, but because we fear how others might see us. We pursue lives not for fulfillment, but for approval. This is where figures like Diogenes the Cynic feel almost revolutionary. He lived in total shamelessness, urinating in public, living in a barrel, mocking social norms. While his lifestyle is extreme, his message is piercing. Freedom begins when we stop being ruled by shame. Gregor never had that chance. He was born into shame, lived through duty, and died in silence. Gregor didn't die because he turned into a bug. He died because, in the eyes of everyone around him, including himself, he became unlovable. And the saddest part? He believed them. Amongst all this chaos and negativity, there was something very beautiful, a glimmer of hope, which Gregor thought would make him a human again, which I am going to discuss now. At one point, when Gregor realizes that Greta and his mother are removing furniture, clearing the space as though to erase the last traces of his humanity, he clambers up the wall and presses himself to a portrait of a woman. It held him firmly and felt good on his hot belly. But more than comfort, it offered meaning. That picture wasn't just decoration. It was the last remnant of his identity, a relic from the world he once belonged to. For Gregor, it symbolized warmth, elegance, and the dignity of human connection. In the shadow of his dehumanization, he clung to beauty as a lifeline. Later, this lifeline returns in another form: music. Gregor doesn't want food or attention or revenge. He only wants to remain close to the music, to his sister, and to the beauty that momentarily makes him feel human again. Beauty in these scenes becomes more than aesthetics. It is resistance. It is salvation. It reminds Gregor and us that even when our world collapses, beauty can still offer grace. Beauty will save the world. This line was actually said by Dostoevsky's Prince Mishkin, and Kafka subtly shows us that in the darkest hours, beauty doesn't fix everything, but it can keep us from vanishing completely. Kafka too presents beauty not as escapism, but as an anchor to our truest selves. Perhaps Kafka is whispering here that shame can deform us, cruelty can isolate us, but beauty, art, music, memory, love endures.